Hello again, as you know, I'm Eli the Computer Guy over here for EliTheComputerGuy.com and EverymanIT.com. Today's class is Introduction to Digital Surveillance Systems. So this is going to be kind of cool. This is a kind of high-tech, kind of like Mission Impossible type stuff. We are going to be talking about all those little video cameras you see all over the place. We're going to be talking about how they work, what they are, how to install them, etc. This is the first course in the digital surveillance systems track. So this is going to be an introduction today. We're going to go over the different types of systems, the different types of cameras, the basic glossary terms that you have to understand, and then we will have more classes that will dive deeper into the different facets of this technology. We'll have a class on how to spec out a surveillance system and make sure you're buying all the right parts. We'll have a class on how to install an analog surveillance system, and we'll have at least one class on how to install network surveillance systems. So this class today is a basic introduction to the concepts that you're going to have to understand. One of the things that you're going to have to get you through your head, and you're going to have to make sure that you understand, is when we are talking about digital surveillance systems, we are going to be talking about basically two different types of digital surveillance systems. There is the old analog digital surveillance system, and there is a new IP-based digital surveillance system. A lot of the concepts of these two systems are the same, or at least very, very similar. Some of the concepts are very, very different. So I want you to think about this as we're talking about these different types of surveillance systems, cameras, and how it all works. So when you're listening to me, I will try to make sure that I separate the two types of systems, but just realize there are two types of systems. There's the old analog system that was being used widely all the way up until about 5 years ago, and there are the new IP-based systems, which people are going to now. Again, a lot of similar concepts, a lot of completely different concepts too. So as we're talking about this, I just want you to keep that in your head. I've installed digital surveillance systems, so you know this is one of those money tracks. This is one of those tracks where if you sit down, you learn what I'm talking about, you get some parts on your own, you figure out how to install surveillance systems, you can make a lot of money very, very quickly. Digital surveillance systems, you're looking at being able to install for anywhere between $500 to $1,000 per camera, which literally means $500 to $750 profit per camera, which means I used to be able to install a 4-camera system, have the check in my hand in about 3 hours. You do the math on that. So this is one of those tracks. It doesn't have to be about theory. You can watch this for fun. You can watch this, just for entertainment and academia. But if you want to use what I'm telling you and go out and make some money, just understand doing digital surveillance systems can be very, very, very relatively easy, good money. The big thing that I'm going to tell you though with digital surveillance systems is when you're in the technology field and you're installing or you're implementing different facets of technology, you're going to be using different resources. So when you're doing web design or if you're doing web programming, you use a lot of your time for that. So if something blows up, if something doesn't work out right, you may not be able to bill for time, but you're not necessarily losing very much money. The warning that I will give you, and I've done a lot of these surveillance systems and I've seen them blow up, is surveillance system installation is a very hardware intensive type of technology. So if you make a mistake, you can eat a big loss. I've seen $2,000 and $3,000 losses. Not just that you lost the sale, but you lost the sale and now have $3,000 worth of paperweights sitting in your stock room. So, we're going to go over this more as we go through the track. I'm going to be talking about the things that you have to think about when you're installing these systems. But please keep in your mind, this is one of those facets of technology, if you're going to do, that you have to plan extraordinarily well. You have to purchase your equipment from good vendors. And basically, when you walk in the door, you have to know exactly what you're doing. If you do, this is easy money. This digital surveillance systems, this is the crap you can make $1,000 an hour at. And I'm not joking, not being melodramatic. This is the stuff you can make real money at. This is also the stuff, if you go out and buy cheap crap on the internet, if you don't sit down and make sure you know what you're doing, like I say, you can eat thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in losses in the blink of an eye. So that's the main warning. That's the big warning I will give you with this track. Huge upside as long as you take your time. As long as you make sure you know what you're doing. As long as basically you make sure that you're a professional about what you're doing. Huge downside if you go in and you act like it's amateur hour. So just keep that in mind. So again, this is Introduction to Digital Surveillance Systems. Again, this is the first class in the track for digital system installation and maintenance, etc. We're going to go over the different types of digital surveillance systems, the different types of technology. We're going to go over the types of cameras that you're going to worry about. We're going to talk about things that you should consider when you're purchasing equipment. We're going to talk about some of the legal issues that you should think about, and basically then we'll just wrap all this up. So if you give me a second, we'll dive into this class, Introduction to Digital Surveillance Systems. So there's two basic types of digital surveillance systems that you are going to be dealing with when you get into digital surveillance systems. You're going to be dealing with the old analog version of digital surveillance systems, and you're going to also be dealing with IP-based surveillance systems. So in order to understand what I'm talking about, let's first talk about what analog surveillance systems are. So with analog systems, basically what you have is you have a camera like this. You have a cable that goes from this camera, so this camera may be on the side of the building, it may be 500 feet that way. This may be a long, long way away. But you have a cable that goes directly from here all the way back to a port on a computer that looks like this. So you have a cable that runs all the way from this camera, wherever this camera is, to a port on a computer that looks like this. This is called a BNC connector, and it is what is normally used in digital surveillance system for analog systems. So you have what is called a home run. There's no breaks in the connection. It doesn't go through switches. It doesn't go through networking equipment. You have a cable that goes from here all the way to here. It's something called a Siamese cable. It's basically a coax cable with power wire connected to it. So you have a cable that goes from here to here. Then what happens is once the video feed goes into a card like this, then the computer turns that into the surveillance system. So you can have 4 cameras, 8 cameras, 12 cameras, 16 cameras, or 32 cameras connected to the analog digital surveillance system. All those cameras come into these individual ports, so 1 camera per port. Then, this is kind of like a video card or an input card for the computer. It then reads all those inputs, puts it through software, and then that software does all the recording, it does the monitoring, it does all the fancy stuff you think of a digital surveillance system. So this is the first type. So it's an analog surveillance system. So you have a camera, the cable goes from the camera directly to the card. So this is what is a card for what is called a PC-based DVR. Why? Is because this is an actual PCI card. These can be made for any type of card, for a normal PC, a normal Dell, a normal HP, a normal E-machine. You slot this in, you install the software onto the PC, and that makes it a DVR. So the cable runs from the camera. This is installed into any kind of computer, and then that becomes your DVR. So this is the first type of analog system. Now the second type of analog system you may deal with is one of these guys. So this is called a DVR appliance. Basically all this is a computer in like a VCR close. So this is a computer that is specifically built to be a DVR. So you have these BNC connectors in the back. Again, video comes from the camera, goes in here, and then this DVR appliance deals with the video. So it records the video, it shows the video, it streams the video over the internet, etc. The good parts about these DVR appliances is that they are a lot less expensive than PCI-based DVRs. The reason is if you buy a PCI-based DVR, they're all Windows computers that you have to buy. So you have to buy, let's say, a $400 or $500 computer. Then you spend anywhere between $200 to $1,200 for that PCI card, and then you have a DVR. So your cost, not your client's cost, your cost for a PC-based DVR is gonna be anywhere between, let's say, $600 for a 4-camera system, to about $1,600 for a 16-camera system. So that's pretty expensive. Well, with these appliance-based DVRs, these are really dirt cheap. They're based off of Linux. They use very inexpensive parts inside. So a 4-camera DVR like this may only cost you $200. A 16-camera DVR may only cost you $500. So that can be a huge price difference. The issue is, and this is where you have to be careful, is when you have a PC-based DVR, if any parts break in that PC-based DVR, you can replace them fairly easily. It's just a normal PC. If the motherboard dies, you can swap out the motherboard. If the processor dies, you can swap out the processor, etc., etc., etc. It's simply a PC. You would repair it like any other PC. The only difference is it has a special DVR software installed and it has a special card installed. That's it. Well, the thing is, with one of these appliances, if there's any problem with that appliance, you cannot purchase parts for it. So basically, if anything in this little DVR appliance dies, you have to buy a new one. So this is something to think about, for your client and what their needs are. If they're looking for the least expensive thing out there, a DVR appliance is probably what's best for them. If they're putting the DVR into some place where there might be a lot of breakage, then they probably want a PCI-based DVR. I had this issue with one of my clients was in a horse farm. They put it into an office. They swore it was going to be clean in the office. It wasn't clean. One of the problems was we put in one of these appliance-based DVRs. It got gunked up with crap within about 6 or 7 months, blew out the DVR, blew out some of the parts in the DVR. I couldn't repair it. So basically, we then bought them a PC-based DVR. Again, after 8 months, a couple of the parts blew out. The difference was that time, for $100, I could swap out their power supply and it was back up and running again. So that's something to think about. These appliance-based DVRs are a lot less expensive than PC-based DVRs, but you can't repair them. The PC-based DVR, again, you can do normal maintenance on it, just like any computer. So that is the first type of DVR. This is the analog DVR. So you have a camera. This has a coax cable, so like the cable that goes in the back of your TV. It has a coax cable like that, but it uses a BNC, what's called a British Naval Connector. So it connects here, then however far away this is, that wire runs all the way back to the port on the DVR. There's no networking with this. There's no routing protocols. There's no TCP/IP. There's no ARP. There's none of that stuff. This is as complicated as basically running cable for your cable TV. It runs off the same basic technology. So you have a cable, runs from here directly back to the DVR. The DVR deals with the stuff. Again, no switches, nothing. It's simple. Well, then we have what are called IP-based systems. So this is an IP camera. This is actually a megapixel camera made by a company called IQ Envision. Very good company. I don't make any money saying that, but it is a very good company. So this is an IP camera. The difference with IP cameras is that the IP cameras have brains themselves. So when you have an analog camera like this is dumb. This is below dumb. This is below retarded. This has had like a frontal lobotomy. This has no intelligence. Nothing. It's just a rock. It just does what it does, and that's it. IP cameras have a lot of intelligence. These are actually computers unto themselves. As we talked about in the Introduction to Convergence class, as we've talked about in the Introduction to Voice over IP class, this is an IP device, which means it is actually its own computer. It has a lot of intelligence in here. It has its own little web server. It can actually store data directly onto itself. It does a lot of cool things. So this is a very complicated device. The thing with this is that instead of using a British Naval connector, it uses a TCP/IP, just a normal Ethernet port. So you can plug this into your TCP/IP network, which means this can go through your switches, it can go through your routers, and it can do all the fancy stuff on your network. You can plug this into the same network that you plug your PC into, or you plug your voice over IP phone into. This transmits data over the TCP/IP protocol over Ethernet. So that's the big difference between the old analog cameras and the new IP cameras. This transmits over old coax cable. You have a home run, so it goes directly from this camera all the way back directly to the DVR. Has to be that way. No networking equipment in between. This uses TCP/IP. So if you understand TCP/IP and you understand subnet masking and all of that, you can put this anywhere on the network, and it will be able to communicate back with your server. So with this, there are some interesting things that you have to keep in mind. Now, since this has intelligence, it can do a lot of stuff on its own that analog camera cannot. So this camera right here can actually be its own complete surveillance system. So when I had this installed in my store, you can actually put a memory card in here. You can put a compact flash card in here. So it will record video directly to that compact flash card. Then, not only that, since it uses TCP/IP, you can actually go into a web browser. If you plug in this IP address for this camera, it will then pop up and you will be able to view live feed what's going on now, and if you've set it up to record, you can also view what's been recorded onto the memory that's in the camera itself. So the big thing between analog cameras and IP cameras is this is smart, that is dumb. When we're talking about surveillance systems, you will hear two terms. So there's one, digital video recorder, then there is another one, so that's DVR, then there is NVR. So you have DVR is, DVR is digital video recorder, and NVR, none of those work, is called network video recorder. So when you're using IP cameras, you're going to be using NVRs. When you're using analog cameras, you will use DVR. So digital video recorder, network video recorder. So those are the two overall types of surveillance systems. You have the old analog, old technology, and then you have the new IP-based cameras. You will also hear of something called hybrid systems. So if you use surveillance equipment from a company such as GeoVision or Kodacom, they have DVRs that can accept input both from the old analog cameras and from the new network cameras. So you can have analog cameras going back to BNC connectors on the computer, and it will also bring in information from these IP cameras. Those are called hybrid systems. So those are the basic systems. When you're going out, when you're researching different systems, that's what we're talking about. DVR, dumb cameras using BNC, basically coax cable. NVR, network video recorders, are using IP cameras. Basically what they do is through the TCP/IP, they pull in the video stream that is coming from the IP camera, and then they store it onto that server. Now, one of the things that you're going to have to keep in mind is that cameras are not as good a quality as they make them out in the movies, in TV. If you watch movies, if you watch TV, you will see where they have these really grainy, horrible video shots of some criminal doing something, and then they can recompile that video into a crystal clear image, like the image that you're seeing me talking to you. And then they'll be able to identify the criminal, and everything will be good. Well, one of the issues that you're going to deal with is why people have moved away from the old analog systems is analog cameras are pretty crappy. So the best analog camera, the best analog system only records at about the quality of a DVD. So those little discs you put in and you watch, Pirates of the Caribbean or whatever. The DVD, that's the highest quality you're going to get out of these old analog cameras. That seems really good, but let me tell you, it's really, really crap. If you actually had to blow up the picture and identify anybody in court based off of picture, off these old analog systems, it is very, very, very difficult. Basically, for one little room, for one little 1,000 square foot room, you would need 4 of these cameras to be able to surveil that room and have a quality of picture that's good enough that you could take to court and prove that that guy is the one that actually do it. These have very low quality. Again, if you're from my generation, I'm 35, DVD, I remember when DVDs were supposed to be the most amazing, great format out there. Well, the reality is DVD quality video really isn't that good, and that is the best that you're going to get out of one of these. Now, why you go to IP-based systems is such as this. This is a megapixel camera. This is actually a 5 megapixel camera. What that means is this records in about the same quality as the video that you're seeing me on right now. So this records in actual high definition quality. So when I have my store, I could use one of these cameras for a 1,000-foot room and surveil the entire room to a quality that if anybody walked in, you could identify them in court. Very good. With these, the sky is also the limit on resolution. So they have 11 megapixel cameras or 15 megapixel cameras. You're going to spend about $15,000 for one of those, but they have them. You can have very, very, very good cameras. Megapixel cameras, they have cameras so good, you can surveil an entire mall parking lot with one camera, and you can zoom in and look at any individual walking through the parking lot. So that's the big quality difference between analog systems and IP systems. Analog, the best you're going to get is DVD quality. IP systems, sky's the limit. Someday they may have 50 megapixel cameras. They're probably going to cost $50,000 a piece, but they will have it. So that's one of the big differences with the IP and the analog systems. So when we're talking about different systems, when we're talking about DVRs and we're talking about things like recording the video, one of the things that you're going to hear is called FPS, or frames per second. This is how many frames the camera captures per second of video. So basically, when the camera is taking video, it's more like a flip book. It's more like it takes a lot of individual pictures and then plays them back to you so fast that you see the action happen. So 30 frames per second is actual real time. So if you hear that a camera or a system does 30 frames per second per camera, that means it is either viewable or recordable in real time. It actually, when you watch the video, it's as fast as I'm moving now. It is real time. 15 frames per second is perceived real time. So you, as a human being, if you see something, if you see a video at 15 frames per second, you are going to perceive it as real-time video. It might be slightly off, like a tad bit off, but as far as you're concerned, it will seem like it's real-time. There won't be any jitters or anything like that. Now, if you go down to, let's say, 7.5 frames per second, then that's where you start to see the jitters. So, if this video was at 7.5 frames per second, you would see me doing things like this. Basically, you can still see me moving and doing stuff, but they would be very choppy. It's like I'm doing the moonwalk or something. Then once you get below that, the video becomes more and more choppy. So a lot of times, like if you're watching on the news and they show video footage, they'll show that the surveillance system had like 1 frame per second. And that's where, you see the guy's face here, and the next shot is you see the guy's face here, and the next shot is you see the guy's face here. So that's like 1 frame per second. So 30 frames per second is actual real time. 15 frames per second is perceived real time. 7.5 frames per second is jittery, but you get the point. Less than that's when it seems like people are like transporting, across the room. So that's frames per second. Now, when you're looking at frames per second, FPS, you have to be careful when you are looking at these systems, because FPS will be used for a number of different specifications. So if you're using network video recorders, IP cameras, it's all usually pretty much the same. With DVRs, with the old analog cameras, it can be very, very different. So when they talk about frames per second, the first thing you have to look at is what is the live view FPS. So the live view FPS, or frames per second, is when you are looking at the monitor and you're watching all the cameras in actual real time, how fast is everything moving? And it will say 30 frames per second, or 15 frames per second, or 7.5 frames per second. So if you're in the guard shack and you're surveilling the parking lot, right now, that's how it's moving. If it's 30 frames per second, you're seeing it in real time. If it's 7.5 frames per second, you're seeing things jittery. Then it will have the record rate. So there's the live view, but then there's a record rate. So you may see live view at 30 frames per second, but then it may only record at 7.5 frames per second. So this is something that you have to keep in mind. What the live view is and what the record frames per second is can be two different things. Then the final thing is you have to look at the frame rate per second, the FPS per channel and per card. So what does that mean? So it will say, let's say 30 FPS capable per channel. That means you can have real time for the camera. If this camera gets plugged into the card, you can have 30 frames per second. But the board itself may be not capable of giving you 30 frames per second for every single camera. So a lot of the less expensive systems, a lot of the expensive PC-based cards, what they'll do is per channel, you can do 30 frames per second, real time and recording. But per card, it will only do 60 frames per second. So with this, what that means is basically everything has to add up. So one camera could be at 30 frames per second. Then you could have, let's say, 2 cameras at 15, or let's say, then you could have 2 cameras at 10 frames per second. So that gets you up to 50. Well, I guess you'd have 3 cameras. But basically, they all have to add up. So if you look at it and the channel says 30 frames per second, make sure the board can then do all those different channels. So a four channel board with 4 cameras, in order to be able to record real time, the board would have to be able to do 120 frames per second. So if you see that the board only does 60 frames per second, that means 1 camera can be real time, and then you have to divide up the frame rate between everything else. So that is FPS, or frame rate per second. This is very important to understand. Again, where I was talking about, you have to spec out systems properly, this is one of the things that can really screw you up. So FPS, frames per second, basically pictures taken per second, 30 FPS real time, 15 FPS perceived real time, 7.5 FPS jerky. Less than that, it gets even more jerky. There's live view, recorded, and then per the entire card. Keep that in mind. Then we'll be talking about resolution. So another one of the glossary things that you have to realize with these cameras is resolution. When you're dealing with the old analog cameras, when you're talking about resolution, you're talking about TVL, or TV lines. TVL is the horizontal lines. Basically, in a camera or in a TV, you have lines that go across the TV screen. Those are the TV lines. So cameras now, The highest quality, like I say, is about DVD quality, can go up to 600 TVL or TV lines. That is high quality camera. You can also go all the way down to 320 TVL. These are very low quality cameras. So that's when you're buying your camera, that is what you have to think about, you have to look at. 320 TVL is about the lowest quality camera, analog camera that you can buy. It's the lowest quality resolution. Essentially, you see that a room exists and you see a blob moving across the room. You might be able to see the blob had an orange coat on. You might think the coat is brown. But that's the issue. So TVL is resolution. We're dealing with these analog cameras. Like I say, 320 is about the lowest you can go. You can see blobs move across the room. 600 now is the highest you can go. And again, that is about DVD quality. Again, I will remind you, DVD quality isn't actually that good, at least in the surveillance environment. When you're dealing with IP cameras, well, the resolution is just insane. Basically, the sky is the limit. Whatever your pocketbook can afford, you can get that resolution. Well, remember, analog cameras, they cap out at DVD quality. This caps out at your budget. If you've got 50 grand to spend on one single camera, you can buy a really, really, really good camera. Normally with the resolutions, they'll basically say that's like a 1 megapixel, a 5 megapixel, a 10 megapixel, a 20 megapixel, but they'll give you the actual resolution in pixels when you're looking at the specification. So it'll say like 648 by 720, 1800 by 1180 or whatever it is, etc. It'll actually give you, with IP cameras, it will give you the resolution just like if you were looking at a monitor resolution. So it's a lot easier to understand with that. So analog cameras are TVL, IP cameras are just resolution, how many pixels it records. The big thing to remember with these IP cameras is everybody thinks all IP cameras are megapixel cameras. Again, this camera right here is really good. This is a $2,000 camera. Pet it, treat it nice. This is a very good 5 megapixel camera. So this one camera can surveil, like I say, an entire 1,000-foot room really, really well. You can zoom in. I have one of these, an external one. You can zoom in at a license plate from like 500 feet and read the license plate. It's very good. Also, it's $2,000. You can get much better. The thing to remember when you buy these lower quality ones, let's say from Linksys or D-Link that are like $200 or $300, they're IP cameras, not necessarily megapixel cameras. So although they use IP, the quality is the quality of one of these little pieces of crap. So remember, not all IP are megapixel cameras. Some of the less expensive IP cameras have the same quality as this stuff. The final thing, when we're dealing with definitions and understanding this system, is that you can record video based on motion or based on events that happen within the video. So when you're recording, all the video that's going on, that takes up a lot of space. Even now with 1 terabyte hard drives, 2 terabyte hard drives, 3 terabyte hard drives, if you've got 16 cameras recording 24 hours a day, it eats up the space every once in a while. So what you can do is you can actually record based upon when there is motion going on in the scene. So like at night when I had my shop, as soon as we closed up the shop, it generally did not record anything during the night unless something happened in the shop. If one of my guys came in at midnight, it would take a picture of them coming in at midnight. But for the rest of the time, it was not recording anything. So that's one of the things that you have to think about with these systems, just a curious thing to keep in mind. So this is a basic overview of the types of systems that you're going to be dealing with digital surveillance and some of the glossary terms you have to understand. Remember, the analog systems, these are old systems. Basically, you're using coax cable to connect cameras back to DVRs. DVRs can either be PC-based, where you have a card installed into the computer, or it can be an appliance. Remember, this is more expensive, but it's going to be a better quality, and if anything goes wrong with that DVR, you can fix it, generally. If anything goes wrong with this appliance, it's cheaper, but you got to replace the entire darn thing. Something to think about. We talked about the IP system. So the IP With these cameras, this camera is an actual computer device, just like a voice over IP telephone. It's no longer a dumb device. This has brain power. This particular one has its own web server. If I plug this into the network, I can go to the IP address, I can view what it's viewing, it can record internally, it can do a lot of cool stuff. This is an IP camera. This can send video over the IP network back to an NVR, a network video recorder. The nice part with this is you can use your internal network infrastructure. So you can use your switches and you can use your routers, etc., etc., etc. If you want to put this on the other side of your warehouse building, you don't have to run a cable from one side of the warehouse all the way to the other. You just run a cable from wherever the closest network jack is to this. So you may only have to run a cable 10 feet. Versus with this, if you have to install this on the other side of a warehouse, you have to run a cable all the way from this, all the way, 1,000 feet back to where the DVR is. We also talked about, remember, they're a hybrid system, so you'll see more and more of these out there, especially if you look at GeoVision systems or Kodacon systems. What these are they're the old DVRs, but they also pull in data from IP video cameras. So they pull in video from analog cameras and from IP cameras. We talked about FPS, frame rate per second. Remember, this is, when the video is recording, it's basically taking a lot of pictures and then just stringing them together like a picture book. 30 frames per second, real time. 15 frames per second, perceived real time. 7.5 frames per second, jittery. And then as you go down, it gets worse. Remember, when you're looking at DVRs and such, it will say frames per second for a number of different specifications. One is per channel, so that's per camera. The other is per card. So you could do 30 FPS per channel, but then on a 4-channel system, it may only have 60 FPS total. You also have live view. So this is the frame rate per second you're going to be seeing live, what's happening now when you watch it, that's how fast it goes, and then recorded. And again, those don't have to be the same thing. A lot of times you'll have a 30 frame rate per second for live view and 7.5 frame rate per second for recorded. Again, not necessarily a bad thing, but remember, if you're selling this to a client, the client wants what they think they bought, and if they think, if they're getting something that that is less of a quality than they think they bought, it all goes bad. Then there was resolution. Remember, with analog cameras, we're dealing with TVL, TV lines. These are the horizontal lines on a normal old TVR, cathode ray tube that probably nobody has anymore. 600 TVL is approximately, don't beat me up if you're an actual surveillance guy, but approximately DVD quality. And again, ain't as good as you think it is. And then goes all the way down to about 320 TVL, which is a low quality. Basically, you see the blob moving across the room. Resolution with IP-based cameras, you're dealing with the same resolution you would with monitors. It'll say, I say 648 by 710, or all the different definitions. 5 megapixels are very good quality. Goes all the way up to 15 megapixels, etc. But just remember, just because it's an IP camera does not mean it's a megapixel camera. A lot of people get that one confused. So they go out, they buy this Linksys piece of crap for $200, and then they wonder why this sucks. Well, because it's a $200 Linksys camera. Then the final thing we talked about was motion recording. Just something to keep in mind with these systems is you'll be watching everything, live view, but then when you go to record, or when the system records video, you want to set it, or it should be set so it only records when motion is actually happening. Because remember, if you have 16 cameras all pumping data back to that DVR 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're going to fill up the hard drive. By only recording when there's motion, it just makes life easier. So that's some of the basic stuff you have to understand with these systems when you're dealing with digital surveillance systems. So we just talked about the systems. So now let's talk about the cameras themselves. So there's a number of different cameras out there that you're going to be dealing with, and there's just some basic concepts again that you're going to have to understand. So you will hear the type of camera. So what type of camera are you going to be using? This is generally what form does the camera take. So the form that many people use is what is called a bullet camera. So a bullet camera is basically a self-enclosed camera like this, where the mount, the camera, everything is all sealed into one unit. So this is an inside-outside, it's an actual infrared bullet camera. But the idea is this is the mount, so you actually screw this directly to the wall. Everything's connected. All you have to do is you screw this into the wall, you run a cable, connect this to your DVR, and it's done. And you aim it. That's it. You don't have to focus it. There's no focusing with one of these. You don't have to attach anything. You don't have to add anything. You buy this and you bought everything you need. You screw this thing to the wall, you connect it to the recorder, you aim it, and you're done. That's a bullet camera. This is a heavy duty external to go outside bullet camera. You can also have the little eeny bullet cameras that go inside. So this is something like if you're at a convenience store, you could install this just on the wall. That has a little mount. You just screw it in the wall. Again, you aim it, you connect it to the DVR, and you're done. But this is a bullet camera. When they're talking about bullet cameras, you're talking about a camera, basically looks like a little cigar or such, connected to the mount, and the mount screws it to the wall. That is a bullet camera. Then you have what are called dome cameras. So a dome camera is basically like this. This is probably the camera that you kind of think about when you think about surveillance systems. So the camera is in here. If you want to unscrew this, you can see there's a camera. So that's basically all it is covered by a dome, and it's screwed to the wall. So there's a little mount here, you screw it to the wall, again you connect it to the DVR. So you screw this to the wall, you aim it, blah blah blah. The nice part why people like dome cameras is because once they're set up properly, you can't mess with it. So with a bullet camera, the nice part is you just screw it to the wall, you aim it by moving it, and then you walk away. The problem is an employee or a criminal can also move it just by hitting it with something, and then it's no longer, seeing what it's supposed to see. With a dome camera, the reason people use dome cameras is it's protected by the dome, so you can't just whack it, you can't just hit it. Once you've moved it to where it should be, it will always stay there. So that's a dome camera. The next kind of camera is basically the camera that I've been showing you so far. This is called a box camera. So the reason it's called a box camera is when you buy it, you just get, and this is the important thing, when you buy a box camera, all you get is this. You get a box. That's a camera. The issue with this, the good part or the bad part, is you have to buy all the ancillary stuff. So you may buy the box camera for $250, but then you also have to buy the lens. And you also have to buy the mount. See, there's no mount. You can't screw this thing to a wall. You have to buy a mount for it. Why people like box cameras is it gives you a lot more flexibility. If you're running a little digital surveillance business and you never really know what you're going to need, the cool part with box cameras is you can just buy 100 of these and then just add whatever lens you want, add whatever mount you want as you go. So sometimes you use a box camera with this lens, sometimes you use a box camera with that lens, whatever. The issue, what you're going to have to remember though, and again, this is where it can bite you in the butt if you're buying these for clients, is if you're buying box cameras for clients, remember it's generally not going to come with the lens, and it's not going to come with the mount. This lens can cost an additional $100 very easily, and the mount generally costs an additional $5 to $10. So if you're doing a 16 camera system, that means you just lost $1,800 with the project if you screwed it up. The other issue that you deal with these box cameras is with the other cameras, you get what you get, and they give you a nice general purpose lens. So the lens that they give you, you don't have to focus at all. You just put it up there and it sees what it sees. With these box cameras, you can buy different lenses. And so they can have, some can be telephoto, some can be wide angle. You can buy different lenses based on whatever your requirements are for the project. The problem with that is if you don't really know what your requirements are going to be, you could buy the wrong lenses. So the nice thing with the dome cameras and the bullet cameras is the lens they give you is always pretty good. It's always the one that you're probably going to need. Whereas with this, if you're just being stupid and you buy 16 of the wrong lens, well then, again, you can be out $1,600. So that's a box camera. The final type of camera that you will see is one of these monsters. This is called a vandal-proof dome. Look at this thing. This is built to get hit with a sledgehammer. So it's a dome camera like I showed you before. The difference is it's aluminum encased, not plastic. It has one of these reinforced, whatever, composite domes. And basically you can hit one of these things with a sledgehammer and the camera itself will be perfectly fine. That's why these things are so expensive. You can put them in really nasty, horrible environments. They can get hit with all kinds of crap and they'll stay good. I've used these, like I say, in really nasty outdoor environments, and I've also used these. I had a swim club that I had to deal with. That was one of these old 1950s places where a lot of the public areas, the hallway, like the roof, the ceiling was only a little bit over even my head. So I mean, these ceilings were only 6.5 feet tall. So I use these vandal-proof domes because they weren't very high up. If somebody wanted to hit a camera, I mean, literally, a lot of the cameras were mounted this high up in a hallway. So we use these vandal-proof domes to make sure nobody did anything stupid to them. One of the warnings that I'll give you with a vandal-proof dome is you can hit this vandal-proof dome with a sledgehammer and you're not going to hurt the camera. But it's only going to stay in the wall as well as you have mounted it. So I've seen people in the real world, they buy these very expensive vandal-proof dome cameras and then they mount it very poorly. Well, it's kind of like a piñata. Or not really a piñata, but you can hit it. The camera itself isn't going to be damaged, but if it goes flying into the next parking lot after you hit it, well, it's not very useful. So that's just one of the things to keep in mind with these vandal-proof domes. They're very, very hard, very, very stable, but if you don't mount them very well, they're still just basically easy to knock out and take out of commission. So those are the basic forms that you're going to be dealing with cameras. You have bullet cameras, you have dome cameras, you have box, and you have vandal-proof. You will also see when you go to buy your cameras, they will say whether they're built for indoor or outdoor use. It's very important. You can use outdoor cameras inside. It doesn't matter. You cannot use indoor cameras outside. It's like any piece of electronics. If you take your DVD player and you put it outside and turn it on and it rains, it's going to be bad. So just, when you're looking to buy these cameras, make sure that they're built either for indoors or outdoors. Indoor cameras are going to be less expensive. Outdoor cameras are, of course, going to be a little more expensive. Just make sure you buy this. I've seen this again, people trying to be cheap. They buy indoor cameras, they put them outside, they fail after 6 months. Of course. The next thing that you're going to have to think about with cameras is whether or not you're going to get a low light camera. So a low light or no light camera is basically a camera like this, but is able to see in very, very low lux. We'll talk about lux in a different class, but lux is a measurement of light. So direct sunlight has a certain lux, starlight has a certain lux, etc. So one of these cameras is a low light camera. This can see in 0.02 lux. What that means is this camera, if this entire room is dark and I light a match, this will be able to see everything in the room. That is 0.02 lux. This is able to see very, very well in low light conditions. So that's a low light camera. You may also be interested in dealing with no light cameras. No light cameras are what are called infrared cameras. So if you're looking at this camera, this bullet camera, you can see all these little LED lights in here. These LED lights are infrared LED lights. What happens is this camera can see in the infrared spectrum, basically black and white in the infrared spectrum. Once the light level goes down below a certain amount, this camera turns on the infrared lights and then it can watch everything. So you could put this in a basement where there is absolutely no normal light whatsoever, The infrared lights will turn on automatically, and then it will be able to see the room, just like if somebody had a flashlight on. So that is a no-light camera. The final types of cameras that you'll hear about, one is the camera may have what is called auto iris. What auto iris means is that inside either the camera or the camera lens, if the light gets too bright, the camera will automatically close the iris, what allows light to come into the camera, to try to darken the image. Basically, think about it kind of like automatic sunglasses. If the light gets too bright, it will try to darken the image so that it can still see the image okay. This is used a lot in buildings where, let's say it's inside a building and the sun comes up in the morning, and for like an hour or two, one room gets really, really bright. So it's very hard for the camera to see. The auto iris will try to dim the room so it can see, and then once the sun goes out of the ray, then it'll open the iris again. That's called auto iris. The final thing is something called wide dynamic range. You will see this on cameras now. Wide dynamic range, again, it's basically that the camera can see in more types of lighting conditions. It can see the quality of light better. So these are the things that you have to think about when you're dealing with cameras. You've got bullet cameras, you've got dome cameras, you've got box cameras. When you're dealing with box cameras, remember you're going to have to also buy the lens and you're going to have to buy the mount. That can add a lot of money to the bill. Keep that in mind. You then have vandal-proof domes. Again, they're great. You can hit them with a sledgehammer. The camera's going to be fine. But again, if it's not mounted to the wall very well, it's going to go flying. It will be fine in somebody else's yard. Inside-outside cameras, like we talked about, some cameras are built to be inside, some cameras are built to be outside. If you take an inside camera and you put it outside, well, you know what's going to happen. One thing I would say with this is when in doubt, buy outside cameras. So when you're dealing with industrial settings, let's say you're dealing with warehouses, you're dealing with let's say stables, farm areas, barns, that type of thing. Although it's technically inside, that's still going to be a pretty harsh environment. So you might as well buy outside cameras just to make sure they're okay. Inside cameras, these things should be used inside convenience stores, inside office spaces, inside retail stores. They really shouldn't be used inside, real warehouses, stables, barns, industrial type areas. They may work for a long time, but they're probably going to die though. We then talked about low light cameras. You'll hear lux, like 0.02 lux means an incredibly low amount of light. Basically it means starlight, the camera can see everything okay. We talked about no light. These are cameras that can view in the infrared spectrum. So once the light level goes below a certain point, they turn on basically their infrared flashlight, and then they can see everything in that infrared spectrum. Then we talked about auto iris. This allows the camera to automatically open or close the iris within the camera to allow more or less light. Then we talked about wide dynamic range. Basically all wide dynamic ranges is that the camera can see in more lighting conditions better. It's just a special type of technology. If you see that the camera has wide dynamic range, buy it. It's a good thing. But those are the types of cameras and the things that you'll have to be thinking about with the cameras. Again, with what I just talked about, this is basically true whether you're dealing with analog cameras or whether you're dealing with IP cameras. Everything I just talked about, this basically stays the same. Now you might be thinking, Eli, wait, you did not talk about the coolest type of camera. Why did you not talk about the PTZ camera? And I will say, because I hate them with a passion. But no, it's a class, so I've got to teach you about all the different types of cameras. PTZ cameras are what are called pan-tilt-zoom cameras. Basically, these are the robotic cameras that you see in the movies. When Tom Cruise is running through the airport and the cameras spin to follow him. Those cameras that move are called PTZ cameras, pan-tilt-zoom cameras. They can either be very big and look very menacing, or they can look very small. Just like with all electronics, things get smaller. So this thing right here is a pan-tilt-zoom camera. It can go one way, it can go the other, it can go up, it can go down, and it can zoom in. So these things don't have to be that big. Again, I'll just say again, at least for analog systems, I hate these with a passion. For IP systems, they're not too bad. One of the things that you're going to have to think about, if you decide that you need PTZ, pan, tilt, zoom cameras in your environment, is the first thing is that not all PTZ cameras are actually PTZ cameras. What? What do I mean by that? Well, when I say a PTZ camera, I'm talking about the robotic functions, the movement functions of this camera. So when I talk about P, I'm talking about pan. I'm talking about it can turn left and right. If I'm talking about T, I'm talking about tilt. It can go up and down. When I'm talking about Z, I'm talking about zoom. I can zoom in or zoom out. When you buy these PTZ cameras, sometimes the cameras are P cameras. So you can buy cameras that pivot. Sometimes they're Z cameras. They can zoom. I still don't know why anybody buys these, but you can. If you go out there, you can buy cameras that simply zoom in on stuff. They can't go left, they can't go right, they can't go up, they can't go down. They can just zoom in and they can zoom out. I don't know why they do it. But that is something to keep in mind if you're looking at buying a PTZ camera. Pan, tilt, zoom. If you need it to actually pan, tilt, zoom, make sure it actually pan, tilt, and zoom. Some of them will pan and tilt. Some of them will only zoom. Some of them will only pan. I don't think there's any that only tilt. But that's one of the first things that you have to realize with these things. The next thing that you have to realize is when you want to make these pan, tilt, zoom, and when you want to make them move, all surveillance systems will allow you to do this manually. Whether you use the up and down arrows on a keyboard or whether it has a cool little joystick, you can sit in your little guard shack a mile away and move one of these things automatically. Well, you can also do it so it's automatic. So if you're sitting in the guard shack, you can do it manually. You can have this so it'll do things like follow motion. So if this is surveilling, let's say, a parking lot, its default view can be the entrance of the parking lot. Well, if a car comes in, this thing can start automatically tracking it as it goes through its field of vision. So it's looking at the camera here, and then car here, and then as the car goes by, it moves with the car and watches it. One of the things with that is you have to look at, if you're interested in doing that, where the intelligence for that movement is going to lie. Some of these pan, tilt, zoom cameras, you can actually program that into the camera itself. So the camera itself will control its own motion. So basically you put in there like motion tracking, whatever the setting for that is, and if it sees any motion, it will follow that motion. Or you can have that robotic function done by the DVR or NVR, the network video recorder. Basically you can program into the computer system what you want this thing to follow, and it will follow that way. So with the automatic function of a PTZ, it can either be built into the camera. If it is, you actually have to go into the camera itself and configure it, or you can have it set up through the DVR, through the computer system, and that is what will control it. So that's one of the things to think about with these. Now, why I hate these for analog systems is they're just horrible. Really, really, I hate them. I hate them with a passion. I won't install them anymore. I refuse. The problem is with these guys is it is the ultimate in Chinese manufacturing problems, where in order for the network video or the DVR, the digital video recorder, to communicate with this, it needs to use a protocol. So just like in the computer world where there's TCP/IP, well, the DVR needs to use a protocol to communicate with this thing. So you run a wire from a controller, so you install a controller onto the DVR, you run a wire from the DVR to this thing that controls it. So on here, I think these are the controller wires right here. So these are the controller wires. This runs all the way back to the DVR. And then it uses a language to talk to the PTZ. Well, the issue is that there are a lot of different protocols. And not all cameras and not all DVRs work well with each other. So there's the Pelco D protocol. There's the Pelco P protocol. There's like 15 different protocols that these cameras respond to better or worse. And if you buy a camera that communicates in 5 different protocols, but it's not the protocol that your DVR communicates in, well, again, you have a paperweight. So that is something to deal with PTZs. I hate PTZs with a passion. I really, really do. If you're in the IP world, it's no more complicated than configuring a normal network device. You just go in, you type out some stuff, again, you plug it into the network, and it does whatever it's supposed to do. With these, you have to install a controller or have a controller installed onto your DVR or DVR appliance. It has to have the right protocol installed so it can communicate with your camera. Your camera has to have the right protocol so it can communicate with that. And there's a whole bunch of other different little stupid settings that are just horrible. The other thing with these PTZs is a lot of times, if you want to install multiple PTZs, you have to install them in a ring typology. So if you remember from the computer world, what a ring typology means is that all the devices in the network are connected in a ring. So you have the wire that runs to this node, and then to this node, and then this node, and then back to your main server. If there's any break in that wire, all your PTZ cameras go down. So if you're installing 10 PTZ cameras, basically what will happen is you will have your server here, right? And then you'll have these PTZ cameras out here. The wire has to go up to this one, and then it goes to this one, and then it goes to this one, and then it goes back. It goes in this circle. If there's any problems in any of these connections, any problems with any of these PTZ cameras, you don't just lose the function of one PTZ camera, you lose the function of all the PTZ cameras. And it's miserable, and it's god-awful, and I swear to God, you can't pay me enough money to do it. I can't, like I said, you know, I'm talking to you guys in the real world. I'm trying to talk to you guys like as professionals, and I'm telling you, I hate these analog PTZ cameras. I hate. I don't care how much money, I don't care if I'm making $1,000 a day off these things. I hate them with a passion. I've installed them numerous times, and they're always just evil. So those are PTZ cameras. Basically, these are the robotic cameras you see in the movies, you know, where Tom Cruise is always trying to avoid. Pan, tilt, zoom. Remember, if you buy a PTZ camera, make sure you're actually buying a PTZ camera. Some cameras only pan, some cameras only zoom, some cameras only pan and tilt and don't zoom. So just make sure you know what you're buying. Remember, as I talked about, the intelligence in these things. These can automatically track things that move into their view. Sometimes the intelligence is built into the PTZ camera itself. Sometimes it's built into the DVR. The DVR is what sends the information here. When you're looking at cabling, you know, normal analog cabling, you run a coax cable and a power supply to the camera. The only addition with a PTZ is that you have to run a wire to the PTZ controller. So you have to install that controller onto the computer, and that controller is what will communicate with this. I talked about those protocols. Those protocols aren't a joke. They are nasty. If you're going to do PTZ cameras, I'll talk about purchasing equipment a little bit later, but this is one of the things, you know, buy Panasonic, buy Sony, buy good quality stuff. These are evil and nasty and tedious. If you buy the off-brand Chinese crap, man, you're going to be balder than I am. You're going to rip out so much hair. I'm really, really serious with these things. So, but that's PTZ cameras. Again, this is one of the differences. If you're in the IP world, so I've been talking about how evil analog PTZ cameras are. If you're in the IP world, well, they're no more difficult to configure than any other networking device. You basically just go to the IP address, you plug in, you tell it what you want it to do, and it does it. And it's beautiful, and it's gorgeous, and it's everything that a really cool robotic camera should be. This is everything that's wrong with electronics. So now we've talked about the systems, basically, and we've talked about the cameras and PTZ cameras. Now let's talk a little bit about networking. So overall, if you're going to be doing these surveillance systems, they're pretty easy. You need to know a little bit of networking, but you don't have to know a lot. I'm going to give you some of the warnings. I'm going to give you some of the things that you should consider when you plug one of these surveillance systems onto the network. Now the first thing is that you make sure you have enough upload speed to be able to support off-site viewing of your DVR or NVR. So what this means is, you set up this video camera system at an auto dealership, and the boss wants to sit at home and watch his auto dealership. Well, just about every surveillance system that's built nowadays allows you to do this. All you do is you do some port forwarding, so the guy sitting at home goes to the external IP address of the auto dealership. You forward, port 80 or whatever it is, to the DVR that's sitting, in their car place, and then he's able to view everything that's going on. Well, what I will tell you is if people are going to be doing off-site viewing, you need to make sure your upload speed for your ISP, your internet service, is at least 2 megabits per second. If the person is going to be watching at home, you are now broadcasting or streaming video from the auto place to his house. That takes up a lot of bandwidth. I've seen mistakes, been involved with mistakes in the past where we did not check how much upload speed the client had, and every time they tried to connect from home, they basically shut down the internet for the entire business. The reason is because as soon as they connected to the server from home, they started streaming all that video, and basically the internet just crashed for everybody. So with networking, make sure that the upload speed is at least 2 megabits per second, and again, the higher the better. 2 megabits per second is for the old analog systems that stream video, but it's not that high quality. If you start getting into megapixel cameras and really high definition, and you want to view that from home, you may need 10 or 20 megabits per second. It depends, but make sure when you're speccing out the system and when you're thinking about it, you have enough upload speed. The next thing is if you're using IP cameras, again, be careful you don't congest your internal network. So if you're using low quality IP cameras, like I talked about, where they have the resolution of one of these old cameras, you don't use a lot of bandwidth. You use a few megabits per second. If you've got a 100 megabit per second switch or a gigabit per second switch, it won't matter. You won't notice anything. Here's the issue. These 5 megabit per second cameras push out a lot of data. If this is pushing back to an FTP server or back to a network video recorder, if you have 10 of these on your internal network, you can bring your internal network to a halt if they are all sending back 5 megapixel video. I forget the exact how many megabits per second that thing takes up. We'll do a class specifically on megapixel cameras and IP cameras, and I'll show you. But that thing pumps out a lot of data. If you put up 10 megapixel cameras and you connect it to the internal network that everybody else is using, again, you will bring the internal network to a halt because those cameras will be using up all of the bandwidth. When I talked about this in the Introduction to Convergence class, one of the things I talked about is having parallel networks, and this is something that you may consider if you're using megapixel cameras. What parallel networks is you use TCP/IP and you use Ethernet and you use all that, but you actually use different equipment for the different devices on the network. So all of your computers go into one switch. All of your IP cameras go into a different switch. Your network video recorder is connected into the switch that all of your cameras are connected into. That means everything gets segregated out and your network video cameras are not taking bandwidth from your computers and your voice over IP telephones and all that kind of stuff. The final thing with networking that I would tell you is that don't use a network video recorder or a DVR for anything else. All of this video is going to be getting pumped back to that server, and if you try to do anything else with that server, it's probably not going to work very well. I tried this personally, didn't do this with my clients, but I said, hey, I've got this network video recorder in my store. It's not really doing a lot. Let me just throw a file share onto this thing. Yeah, it didn't work very well. The reason is because I had megapixel cameras all sending data, in real time back to this video recorder, and then I tried to share files on it, and it was just bad. What I will say with DVRs or NVRs is they should only be used for your surveillance equipment. You shouldn't use them for anything else. Because the main thing is, it's not just like good practice, it's just because they're not going to work well for anything else. If you try to use your network video recorder also as a file server, just take my word for it, it doesn't work very well. Since this is the introduction class, I will go over setting client expectations and dealing with clients a little bit. The biggest problem with installing these surveillance systems is, again, your clients are going to watch way too much TV, NCIS or Mission Impossible or any of that garbage. And they're not going to listen to you when you tell them that the system that you're installing isn't going to be as good as they see on the movies. And this is just something that you're going to have to pound into their heads. Everybody, with NCIS and CSI and all these crime dramas, people just think these systems are better than they are. And then they don't want to pay for the quality they want. Like I say, a 5 megapixel camera, this camera is as good as you see on the movies. It's also $2,000 to have one of these things. One of these things installed. That's not including the server it sends the data back to. So if you want a system of these, you're looking at like $15,000. Just to start, probably $20,000. So what they want is the $4,000 system that with the $20,000 quality, and that doesn't work. I've seen this time and time again. Again, clients just get this image in their head about what they think they're buying. Even if you warn them, that's not what they're buying. So be careful with this. Expectations management is a huge thing. If you are a technician and you have a salesperson going out and selling this stuff, again, I've dealt with this in the real world. Before you install anything, you as a technician need to sit down with a client and make sure they understand what they purchased and what the system will do at the end of the day. I had this happen twice where I had a salesperson. Oh, it went bad because after the $15,000 system was installed, I was sitting there showing the client how to use it, and they started asking, well, how do I do this? And I forget whatever it was. And I looked at them and I said, well, the system doesn't do that. And they looked at me and they said, the only reason I bought this system was because I was told it did that. And then it all goes bad. So we're going to have a class on speccing out the systems and doing site surveys and all that. We'll talk about client expectation more. I just want, in this introduction class to make sure you think about this. Again, all these clients are going to think, they've seen the movies, they've seen these crime dramas, they think surveillance cameras are amazing. And the problem is the cameras many times are not as good as they think they're going to be, and then it just turns into a horrible, evil nightmare. So the big thing when you're dealing with clients is make sure you manage your expectations. Make sure the client knows what they're buying. Make sure you know that the system is in fact going to do what they want, etc., etc., etc. Because again, remember, this is a very equipment-heavy technology business. So if you buy a lot of product and then everything goes bad, that's a lot of money. I've had projects go bad with $6,000 already installed. Like $6,000, it was a $12,000 install, and it was $6,000 of my equipment that had already been screwed, 30 feet in the air and such. Oh, it's just bad. One thing we need to talk about, just very quickly, is legal considerations. So, I'm not a lawyer. I do not practice law. I'm not going to give you, nothing I take should be considered legal advice. You need to make sure that you understand the law in your state, your county, your city, etc. Some of the laws for installing surveillance systems or doing surveillance can be a little wonky, such as here in Maryland. These systems can very easily record audio. So they can record video and they can record audio. It's no big deal, it's already built into the system. Here in Maryland, we have a lot of strict audio laws. It's really weird. Like video, you can record almost anything. But if you want to record people's voices, we have a lot of funny things with our law. Basically, our law states that you have to have mutual consent in order to record audio. So both parties have to agree to have a conversation recorded for it to be recorded. If you're in a state such as Virginia, you only need one party to agree. So if one person agrees to be recorded, you can record the entire conversation. Here in Maryland, both parties have to agree. So when you're doing things like if you want to do audio recording here in Maryland, let's say if you have a gas station, you need to put a big sign on the door, on the window when people walk in that says, you will be video and audio recorded on this premises. By them walking through the door, again, this isn't legal advice, it's just what I've been told. By them walking through the door, it means they agree to that contract. Therefore, if they then pull out a gun and say, "Mofo, give me your money," well, then they've agreed to be audio recorded. If you do audio recording in like back office space, you can end up getting sued. So if you're doing audio recording in your back office and you listen in and you find out your accountant is embezzling from you, well, he can actually go back in civil court and say he had an expectation of privacy in that back room and that therefore you recording him was a violation of his rights. Oh, I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it is. So again, I can't tell you the legal considerations in your area. Just realize when you do surveillance systems, there may be some wonky considerations. You know, if you're in Texas, you know, it's Texas. You may be able to throw up whatever the hell you want and it's all good. Here in Maryland, we've got some real weird audio laws. I do know some states have some weird video recording laws. Just go, you know, talk to police, spend $100, a couple $100 on a lawyer, make sure, you know, see what they have to say. Just keep it in mind with surveillance systems, you can have some weird stuff going on. Make sure you understand the law in your area, because there's nothing worse than making $10,000 on a job and then getting sued for 20. So the final thing we're going to talk about today, before we get to the final thoughts, is buying parts. Now what you're going to find when you go out to buy surveillance equipment, especially if you're buying the old analog stuff, is this is the Wild West of the Chinese bazaar. For some reason, I don't know why, very few well-known manufacturers create surveillance equipment. Like you go out, you want to buy a computer, you buy a Dell. If you want to buy a TV, you buy an LG, etc. You don't do that with these surveillance systems. If you want to buy a PC-based DVR like this, I mean, there's all kinds of weird companies out there. The well-known names that you probably don't know are GeoVision or Kodacom or AverMedia, but you've probably never heard of those people. There is no Sony surveillance system. So when you go out there, make sure you do the research and make sure you're actually buying good quality equipment. The big problem I see with a lot of people that install surveillance systems is that they use incredibly low quality equipment and then it breaks all the time. Remember, as I talk about in business, the number one cost you're always going to have is labor. It's not going to be this equipment. So the difference between a $20 camera and a $120 camera can be a lot for you. Like I had one partner for a little while, he would only buy this $20 surveillance camera stuff. And we would have to go back in a 16 camera job, we'd end up having to go back and replace 8 cameras on the job. So when you're doing this, make sure you go out, you research, you buy high quality parts. If you're doing megapixel cameras, those IP-based cameras actually do have very reputable manufacturers behind them. You can buy Sony, you can buy Toshiba, IQ and Vision is a very good quality. These are all very good quality things. The analog cameras, they all come out of some back room in China. If you're looking at buying the analog cameras, the PC-based stuff, I would suggest you go and look at a website called supercircuits.com. They have every camera in the world, everywhere from 20 bucks to $2,000. They have PTZs and DVRs, network video equipment, the whole 9 yards. Anything you want, you can probably find at supercircuits.com. So the big thing that I'll tell you with this, again, don't buy the lowest quality cheap stuff. It will bite you in the butt. I've seen this, like I say, my first installs, I had one partner to do it. He would always buy $20 cameras that you can buy off of eBay. It seems like a great deal until you're the poor schmuck that's been up on the ladder third time, literally swapping out the third camera for that position. That's really bad. So when you're buying parts, make sure you buy good quality parts. Like I say, if it's $50 or $100 difference in price between a good quality camera and a low quality camera, buy the more expensive camera. It's going to do better for you in the long run. Remember, if you're going to install 16 cameras, if 8 cameras fail, that's a lot of extra work for you to do. So that was a class, Introduction to Digital Surveillance Systems. I think that was a pretty long class. I'll have to see when I cut all this together. But it was a lot to say. Again, digital surveillance systems are their own little world. If you understand a little bit of networking, if you understand a little bit of computers, you can go out and you can create your own digital surveillance system business and do very well. You don't have to know Active Directory to do this stuff. You don't have to know Cisco to do this stuff. You don't have to know programming. Basically, at the end of this track, once I put all these 5 or 6 classes together, you'll know everything you need to know to go out and start your own digital surveillance system business. It's not complicated, but it is specific. So you can go in and you can make a lot of money very quickly in 3 hours, or you can lose a lot of money if you're not precise in what you purchase. If you don't make sure you buy the right stuff and you buy a lot of wrong stuff, and then you've got $6,000 worth of stuff sitting in your stock room. We talked about the different types of systems. So analog systems, basically you have a coax cable that runs from your camera to your DVR. These are relatively inexpensive. This is the old technology though, and again, the best quality you're going to get out of one of these old systems is DVD quality, and again, I'm going to tell you, DVD isn't what you think it is. DVD is actually pretty poor quality. When you're dealing with the analog systems, you can either have PC-based systems. PC-based systems have a card that you install into the PC, and then that turns it into a DVR, digital video recorder. The cameras all then connect to these BNC, British Naval Connector connections on the card, and it's a system. Or you can buy a DVR appliance. Basically, this is just a computer and a box. The problem is this is going to be a lot less expensive. This is going to be half the price of a PC-based system, maybe maybe 3/4 of the price, or 1/4 of the price. But if anything fails, you got to swap out the entire system. You can't buy parts for this thing. So that's one of the things you have to weigh. When you're dealing with IP cameras, so IP cameras transmit the video over your TCP/IP Ethernet network. They communicate back with NVRs, or network video recorders. What you have to realize with the IP cameras is, they run over the IP network. You can have extremely good quality cameras, like I say, that 5 megapixel camera that I showed you, but you can also have low quality cameras. If you go out and you buy a $200 IP camera, it's going to suck. Over IP, you're going to watch a blob move across a room. A lot of people assume IP cameras are megapixel cameras. They're not. Megapixel cameras are a type of IP cameras. IP cameras can be, any quality that they build. We talked about then the hybrid systems. So some of the systems that they're building now, they can support both The old analog cameras and the IP cameras, they all go back to one system. We talked about FPS, frame rates per second. So 30 FPS means real time. You can view things, you can record things in real time. 15 is perceived real time. 7.5 is blocky, and less than that gets even more jerky. As I talked about, when you're looking at the system specifications, you have to look at multiple specifications for the FPS. There's going to be live view or real-time view. This is how smooth is the video in real time. If I'm sitting in the guard shack and I'm watching the video for the parking lot beside me in real time right now, how smooth is the video going to be? A lot of times, almost all the time, that's going to be real time. That's going to be 30 frames per second. But then the recording may be a lot less. It may be 15 frames per second, or 7.5 frames per second, or 2 frames per second. I've seen that. I've seen where it's 30 frames per second real-time viewing and 3.5 frames per second recording. Generally, this isn't actually a big problem, except for if the client expects the recording to be in real time and it's actually in 3.5 frames per second. Then again, it goes into expectation management, everything gets bad. When we talk about the analog systems and frame rates per second, remember there is per channel and per board for FPS. So you can have per channel supports up to 30 frames per second, but a 4-channel board only supports a total of 60 frames per second. So that means one camera can be in real time and the other 3 cameras have to be in something other than real time. Just keep that in mind. We talked about resolution. Again, with analog cameras, these cameras, we're talking about TVL, TV lines, the horizontal lines on an old-fashioned CRT, cathode ray tube TV. 600 TVL is DVD quality. Again, not as good as you think it is. 320 TVL is very low quality. You can see an orange blob move across the room. When you're dealing with resolution with IP cameras, then you're just dealing with normal resolution like you deal with a monitor. It'll tell you, like I say, 648 by 720, 1900 by 2300, whatever the resolution is. Then we talked about motion recording. So with these systems, most of the time they will be set up to only record when there's motioning actually happening in the video shot. This saves the data that's actually stored, so it doesn't have to store as much data. We then talked about types of cameras. So we've got bullet. This is an external bullet camera. You've got an internal bullet camera. These are very easy to install, but if somebody knocks them and moves them to a different direction, well, then obviously you're not watching what you should be watching. This is a dome camera. A little more difficult to install, but it has a dome on it, so people can't mess with it. They can't tamper with the camera itself. Then we have the box cameras. Again, box cameras are fine, if you want to use them. The issue is when you buy the camera, you're only buying the camera itself. You have to buy the lens in addition, and you have to buy the mount. This can add a lot of money. This can add $150 to that box camera. So you look at a $150 box camera, and you look at a $200 bullet camera, and you go, hey, I'm going to go with this one. And then you get this one, and it doesn't come with a lens, and it doesn't come with a mount, and you've got to spend another $150, and this ends up costing $300 versus this one that's $200. So just keep that in mind. Then you have the vandal-proof domes, as I talked about. These you can hit with a sledgehammer, and they will be fine. But again, if they're not mounted into something very well, they could be fine sitting in somebody else's yard. So if somebody hits it with a hammer, the camera is not going to be damaged, but it could go flying. So just make sure if you use those that you mount them properly. Talked about inside-outside cameras. So these cameras are built to either be inside or to be outside. Outside cameras can be used inside. Inside cameras, like I said, you don't take your DVD player out into the rain. You just don't do it. If you're in industrial settings, even if it's inside, use outside cameras. Warehouses, stables, barns, anything like that. Even if there's a roof over it, just use the outside cameras. The reason is they're built to get frozen, they're built to get rained on, they're built to get dusty, dirty, etc. We talked about low light cameras. These are cameras that can see in exceedingly low light. So even in starlight conditions, they can see as if it's a bright sunny day. Those are called low lux cameras. We also talked about no light cameras. Like this bullet camera here, they have infrared lights on them, and they can see in the infrared spectrum. So as soon as the light level goes below a certain level, basically the infrared flashlight turns on, and then it can see in the dark. Then we talked about wide dynamic range and auto iris. Basically, wide dynamic range is basically that it can just view in lots of lighting conditions. Auto iris means if the scene gets too bright, the iris in the camera will automatically close and try to darken the viewing, so you don't get the washout effect. Talked about PTZ cameras, pan, tilt, zoom cameras. Remember, if you go to buy one of these things and you need a PTZ camera, make sure you in fact are buying PTZ cameras. Pan, tilt, zoom. You can buy pan and tilt cameras. You can buy just zoom cameras. You can just buy pan cameras. So if you buy a P camera, you need a PTZ. That's how it goes. Again, we talked about you can have intelligence, so they can automatically track things that come into their field of vision. That intelligence can either be in the PTZ camera itself, or it can be in the video recorder. This is just how you set it up, you know, what kind of equipment you buy, etc. Again, as I talked about with analog cameras, I hate PTZ. You have to have, remember, it's a ring formation for the cameras, so the wire has to go from the DVR to the first camera, to the second camera, to the third camera, to the fourth camera, etc. If there's any break in those controller wires, none of the cameras work. It's just evil. You have to have a controller in the DVR. That controller has to speak the protocol that the camera is going to understand. There's a lot of these protocols out there. Pelco D is like one of the most standard ones. There's also Pelco P. There's probably 20 others. The DVR, the video recorder, and the camera have to speak the same language. They have to be set up to talk on the same language. So sometimes the camera can talk on 20 different languages, but you have to throw these little dip switches to make sure it's talking on the right one. They have to communicate at the right bit speed. It's just evil. Unless they're paying you a lot of money. Unless they're paying you a lot of money. Like I say, I don't even mess with them. Even if I was doing this, I wouldn't mess with them anymore. If you're dealing with IP PTZ cameras, oh, again, they're simple as cake. I mean, you basically just go in and you configure them like you would any other networking device. But analog PTZ cameras are just evil. We talked about networking considerations. So with these DVRs or these NVRs, these video recorders, you can sit at home and watch what's going on remotely. But remember, as soon as you connect to that server is going to start streaming video to where you're at. If your upload speed is very low, you can crash the internet for the entire office because you start using all of that bandwidth to broadcast, to stream the video back to your house, and then nobody in the office has any bandwidth left. I would say at least 2 megabits per second. Try to go for 5 megabits per second, but basically you need at least 2 megabits per second if you're going to be viewing video off-site. Again, internally with IP cameras, if you're using low-quality IP cameras, you can probably use the same networking equipment that you're using right now. If you're using a lot of these megapixel cameras though, they take up a lot of bandwidth. If you have 10 megapixel cameras all sending back real-time high-definition video back to a server, they can eat up all the bandwidth on the LAN, on the local area network. So be careful with this. This is why sometimes, as we talked about in the Introduction to Convergence class, you do parallel networks. So you actually install your own switch, TCP/IP switch, for your networking equipment. So all megapixel cameras go to that one switch, and the recorder is connected to that one switch. Your PCs and phones are connected to a different switch. And then again, finally, it's going to be real tempting, since you have this very expensive server sitting on the floor, to use it for multiple things. Only use it for one thing. Only use it for the surveillance systems. Even if it's a network video recorder, don't think about trying to use it for an FTP server or file server. It's just going to be a miserable, horrible experience. We talked about client expectations. Again, this is going to be one of the biggest things. Your clients are going to watch movies, and they're going to watch TV, and they're going to watch all this stuff, and they're going to think your surveillance system is going to do much more than it's going to do. You have to manage client expectations. There is nothing worse than having $6,000 your cost installed and having the client get pissed. It's just bad. We talked about the legal considerations just to see what the legal considerations in your area are. If you're in Texas, there's probably no legal considerations. Here in Maryland, you can do videotaping is very easy. Audio taping, you know, like I say, you've got these weird legal things that you have to worry about. Buying parts, again, if you're going with IP cameras, most of the IP camera vendors are good. You can get Sony, you can get Toshiba, you can get IQ and Vision. They're all high quality stuff. The analog camera vendors, even the good ones, you're probably not going to know them. Like with DVRs, you probably don't know GeoVision, you probably don't know Nuvaco, you probably don't know Kodacom, don't know AverMedia. So do your research and make sure you are in fact buying good equipment. With the cameras, again, buy the good stuff. You can buy $20 analog cameras. It's just going to be a miserable, horrible experience. I mean, it's just going to be evil. Remember, your time is money. If half the cameras you install fail, which I've seen happen, I haven't just seen happen, I've had to work on the project where it happened. I mean, that's a lot of your time that just goes down the drain. If you're going to be buying, especially the analog stuff, I would say you go to supercircuits.com. They're kind of like the Newegg for surveillance equipment. They've got a lot of stuff up there. They've got reviews, etc. Just go up there, find some stuff you like, buy it, and take it from there. Again, this was the introductory class to this track. We're going to have a class on IP cameras, megapixel cameras. We're going to have a class on installing these analog systems. We're going to have a class on how to spec out systems, how to do site surveys, etc. So if you're still feeling a little shaky, that's fine. Like I say, there's going to be at least 4 more classes in this track. These are just the basic concepts that you have to understand in order to go forward. And then as we go forward, it will all get a lot simpler. Again, you know, this isn't Cisco, this isn't Microsoft, this isn't Linux. This stuff is pretty simple. You just got to know what you're talking about. You have to make sure you know what you're buying. You have to make sure the client knows what they're buying. And then it's just easy money. Like I say, it's just like, if you want to make $1,000 a day or even $1,000 an hour, this is the business to do it in. So yeah, as you know, I'm Eli the Computer Guy over here for EliTheComputerGuy.com and EverymanIT.com. As always, I enjoy teaching this class. This was Introduction to Digital Surveillance Systems. I look forward to seeing you at the next one.